The neighbors did not need much of an excuse. Opportunists among them had been eyeing our fields long before Okon left town. They saw the mbana split and the way the market was thinning, and they decided in small, hungry councils that it was time to take what once had to be shared. Palm plantations, a stretch of river bank, a store. They came with oaths of their own, and with knives tucked into belts. Some came with the rough geometry of men who think the world will offer them easy spoils. They came not as any army formal and proud, but as a mob with torches and a single bruised idea. Take before another takes you. The night they came is a thing I cannot unsay. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see it as a slow unspooling of terror. It started with the hour when the sky looks like folded paper and the stars have not yet put out their lamps. We had known fear in the village before, the fear of storms, of disease, of a man's anger, but nothing had prepared us for the kind of collapse that begins with a single shout. Men from the neighbor villages moved like smoke down the path. At first, we thought they came for trade. When they raised their voices and the first huts were set afire with a careless practiced hand, the market turned from celebration to panic. Mothers clutched children and slipped into the night with wet feet. Fathers, some of them, ran. The sound of running feet across clay is a sound a child remembers forever. It is a sound of betrayal that echoes. I watched a man I had once shared palm wine with lift a child under his arm and run as if his own heart had been stabbed. Another man, a father much like my own brother in the years of our youth, stood rooted to the ground while smoke licked the thatch of his home. When I later saw him, his eyes had the look of a man who had been emptied out by fright. He had left his wife and children, following the mob like a man saved by destruction. Mothers were cruel, then kind, then cruel again. The panic does strange things to the human heart. I saw a mother lift her baby, small and trustful, still needing the warmth of her, and run into the darkness, and then, in the burst of fear, set the child down beside a path because she thought a small bundle might travel faster. I carried that child later. Her little lips blue with cold. She survived not because anyone acted heroically in that moment, but because the earth itself, perhaps, took pity and hid the child behind an overturned pot. The attackers shouted the names of those who had sold the grove, as if naming them would justify the flames. They tore at fences with hands that looked like they had never learnt gentleness. The trees screamed as well. The old ones, split by the crying wind. The mbana was a silhouette that night, the place where the covenant had been made, now a place from which we could not call our protectors back. Fathers fled in the earliest moment. Many never returned to their huts that night. They left wives who were their lovers, and mothers who had fed them at their breast. Some of the men who fled thought they would meet the mob with a spear and come away living. Instead, they were swallowed by the dark and by shame. Others who stayed were cut down, not in the cinematic gore of tales, but in the small, terrible ways real violence comes. A fall that broke a neck, a bad hit to the head, a child's throat closed by fear. I cannot say more. There are edges to memory that refuse to be poked, and I will not make them spectacles. The terror lasted until dawn, when the first gulls of morning lifted themselves and the attackers had taken what they wanted. The fields, the stores, the pride. They left us with charred posts and the smell of burned palms, and with a hole in us that no word can patch. People ran away that day in droves. We who remained tried to count ourselves, to gather the ones too frightened to stand. And then there was the sound that no one in Obio Ntan will ever forget. A silence that fell like a lid. Animals that had been with us, the dogs, the goats, stopped their nosy bickering and lay down as if they too were listening for a voice that would not come. The women who stayed, those older than I, began to cry in a low, endless way. They said the ancestors had turned their faces. They said the covenant had been broken beyond measure. Okon was last seen running, his back like a bent question. He stumbled through paths he once knew, like the lines of his own palm. And later, he was seen in the city, begging, not for money, but for a place to sleep. The pastors and prophets who had once smiled on him now told him simply, go home, go and kneel, return what you can, put back what you took, even if it is only in your voice. He tried to return the money. He tried to call those whose silence had been bought, to make them feel shame. But paper cannot undo what machines had already beaten from the ground. The groove had been cleared. The boundary was fenced. The companies have their contracts, and they do not tremble at an elder sweeping. Okon found doors shut to him, not because he had taken money, but because in every place a man goes, his reputation travels faster than his feet. People in the city would point at his face and say, he was the man who sold his village. His name clung to him like oil. In the months that followed, he lost his job to a minor arithmetic error that in another life would have been forgiven. A man in the office pocketed his savings in a trade meant to enrich himself. Okon's pockets were slit clean by a friend who promised a safe investment. Landlords saw a man without reliable income and moved him to the streets. He came to pastors who said only what a pastor can say, to prophets who pushed ritual and then took more money for it. Everywhere he went, even those who had once chuckled at our rituals, told him to go back to his father's house and make amends. Return home, they said, as if home were a country that could be bought back. But home had been emptied. All the good fences had been taken down by the neighbors, and the huts that remained were full of grief. The children who had survived that night grew thin and distant, their hair brittle, their laughter stranded. The market that had once been a place of gossip and spice and small joys now held the memory of a mob's shout. Years passed, and the wound learned to live. We who remained learned to speak of the ancestors in quiet, careful tones. I grew older. My daughters left for small towns where the dirt is not red and the rain does not smell like rot. They said, Mother, we cannot live with the ghosts. I told them to go, because to stay was to let the sorrow sit on their bones like a weight. When people ask me now, years later, why I stayed, I do not have a godlike answer. I stayed because memory needs witnesses. I stayed because sometimes when the wind comes in a certain way, I hear a soft voice that sounds like the mbana calling my name. Someone must remember. Someone must tell what the wise men did and what the foolish did. Someone must speak of the bargains that ate us from the inside. I tell it so another village might hear, might close their ears when a son returns with shoes that whisper and palms full of tricks. And Okon, he was not spectacularly struck down by a bolt of wrath. He was undone by the small, relentless things. A man in a city office who refused to let him keep his ledger error, a friend who took the last of his savings, a landlord who had no mercy. He was pushed back to us like a thing that had been discarded. He begged, tried to return the money, and we, the elders, looked and could not unmake what had been made. The machines had eaten the groove. The company had legal papers like teeth. I will not say his end was violent in a way that fills pages or lies the reader with blood. I will say he was hollowed out, chased by the shame he had sown. People in towns he entered told him to go home. Eventually he did, but he became a broken man, and the neighbors that night were done with forgiveness. He slipped from our sight one morning and was not seen again. Some say he walked into the river seeking what he had stolen back. Others said he died of fever in a borrowed room. It does not matter. What matters is that his life became a haunted echo. The village never healed. The neighboring community took what remained and moved on with their own lives. We kept our memories like a half-burned clothes. The mbana stands still, half-bald, a scar in the earth where something that once hummed loudly is now only a whisper. The covenant was broken, and without it, small cruelties of men grew larger and bolder. There is a line the elders say to the children when they misbehave, and it has never sounded truer. Respect the ground that holds your father's body. The ground is not just earth, it is law. When we sell the law for coins and promises, we take a knife to our own throats. So hear me, our story is not only a tale of one man's greed, it is a warning about what we do when we trade our souls for the small weather of today. It is about chiefs who accept envelopes and turn the other eye, about neighbors who decide a weak village is a good target, about fathers who run when the night gets loud, and mothers who make the impossible choice between their feet and their babies. We wept the night the village fell apart. We carried the dead on our backs and fed each other with the little we had left. We learned that protection is not something you sell to a ledger, and that promises to the ancestors are not paper agreements, but living, breathing things. When they are broken, the consequences is not a single punishment. It is a long, cold unmaking. As the elders still say in the quiet hours, when the wind remembers its old voice, the tree that forgets its roots will feed the termites before its time. That night the village wept, and I, who sits now with grey in my hair and the mbana's shadow across my lap, remember each tear as if it were a small polished stone. I keep them so you may know what pride can do.